Pulsar Studio.
Video games are the youngest artistic medium, and since their emergence, they have managed to create unforgettable experiences that begin to be lived from the first second. This is Checkpoint, and today we're going to discover an example of how they do it. A few weeks ago, we introduced the importance of openings in video games and started an episodic mini-series of great openings and the resources they use for different types of experiences. The first part consisted of examples of openings for experiences where the narrative is the most important element. I invite you to visit the channel and watch it if you have not already done so. In this second part, we will focus on two great opening examples for exploration and open world games. The first example is arguably the most acclaimed and best received title of the last generation. Breath of the Wild is a game that ventures into many new territories for both Zelda franchise and Nintendo games. However, the design and execution of the game was as if the development team had spent a lifetime creating open world experiences, and the opening is one example of that. All Zelda games have a common narrative component that serves as the foundation in which the experience unfolds, but the narrative portion serves as the context rather as the engine. This is perhaps the Nintendo game that uses the most mechanics, and that is why the opening and introduction to the game faced an important challenge, having to give each element its corresponding place. The game begins with a short sequence in which Zelda calls Link to wake him up from a 100-year-long sleep. This lasts just a minute, also serving as an introduction to the aesthetic style that the game will have. The player takes control of Link the next instant, and the first possible action is to interact with a sort of control where the Shake Slate, the most important tool in the adventure, will be obtained, but without an additional explanation. The dungeon where Link is located will open its door, and the player will be exposed to the first teachings of the mechanics. As during most of the experience, the game gives few explanations through text or tutorials. Almost everything is taught to the player through visual design and exploiting the intuition and experience of the player, both in previous installments and also in games of the genre, and even supporting and prompting the use of common sense and logical reasoning, as the franchise has always done by including puzzles or riddles. After exiting the cave, Link and the player are presented to the shocking, colorful and beautiful world that they have to explore and learn about. A museum-worthy painting that immediately serves as a motivator to start the adventure. Then, through the camera movement, the player is directed to where they should go, but is given the freedom to start interacting at will with that world full of life. And this is the pillar on which the experience is based: freedom and exploration. This first section, in which the player takes the first steps, is made in the style of the initial areas of massive multiplayer online role-playing games, better known as MMORPGs, which are contained areas perfectly designed to serve as a small test of the complete world and serve as a school for the players to become familiar with the mechanics and dynamics of the game, and to know a little about the world in which she is going to enter. The player can take Link to do all kinds of actions, but he will never be able to leave that area until completing his objectives, and he will learn how the world works from his own experience, using few clues or aids through the game interface, text, or instructions from Zelda and King Rome, who serves as Link's mentor in these first steps, and who also explains the events that led to the situation and the mission that the hero of Hyrule faces. This opening only has a few minutes of cinematics in the form of memories and narration or explanation by the characters that are sufficient to understand what the conflict is about and what motivates the adventure. The rest can be up to few hours of gameplay in which the player is exposed to the world and the mechanics and has to learn them in an almost perfect and invisible tutorial, to finish it with the feeling of having traveled a huge world, to realize that this was only a small portion of what is left to discover, giving way to excitement and eagerness to get out there and explore. The second example is another masterpiece of the past generation and the one that marked the initial path that culminated in Breath of the Wild. The Witcher 3 is also one of the most successful and recognized games of all time. It is also a game that revolutionized and laid to the foundations to follow for the design and creation of open worlds, where the size, richness and variety of the content became the standard for games developed after its launch. The Witcher is a very interesting franchise, because its origin gives a lot of weight to the story and narrative, since it is based and inspired by a series of Polish novels with the same name. However, in the last installment, the franchise was consolidated as a game in which the narrative, the characters and the universe have a very high creative level, but these are put in the hands of the player to be experienced from the freedom of an open world in which all the elements are well designed to be loyal to its essence, but also allow that freedom of interaction and decision making by players without breaking their meaning, something that is very difficult to achieve. Being a title with a great narrative force and in which the characters and events have a vital relevance, the game opens with a cinematic that introduces the situation in which the protagonists who start the adventure find themselves. In this case, Yennefer of Vengerberg, the elusive love of Geralt, desperately flees, leaving traces of her path along the way. In the next scene, Geralt and his loyal Witcher friend, Vesemir, follow the sorcerer's tracks a few hours after she's been there. These first seconds give priority to setting the context and allowing both new and veteran players to start this adventure from an understandable point without having to have played previous installments. The type of characters that the players will encounter and what are some of their characteristics is also shown here. For example, Geralt is an excellent detective who uses his superhuman senses to hunt down his prey, something that will be used as an important mechanic in the game. This is shown in that initial cinematic when you can see how Geralt observes and analyzes Yennefer's traces and tracks to follow her trail. A small sample of Yennefer's power and ability is also shown, which serves as motivator for the player to find her and learn more about her, and also helps to understand why she is so important to the protagonist. After 3 minutes of cinematic, the screen shows a picture inside the game engine that has Geralt and Vesemir on a break from their chase. In this painting, you can see only a little demonstration of the world in its style, color and vegetation, but it's also a very representative sample of the kingdom in which the experience takes place and of the landscapes that will be found later. In a very creative way, this moment of rest becomes the first tutorial of the game, entering Geralt's dream, where the player will be introduced to more important characters such as Ciri and a deeper interaction with Yennefer, as well as the personalities of each one and the interaction they have with Geralt. The first action that the player makes, controlling Geralt, is to use his detective skills and find the key to leave the bedroom, coinciding with what have been already shown a few minutes earlier in the initial cinematic. The first detective mission and the dialogues with Yennefer give the player a sample of a recurring dynamic in the experience, which suggests that the activities and actions that will motivate the exploration of the world and will serve as the game loop will not only focus on using the combat skills that a Witcher has, but it will be also the interaction with characters, development of narrative arcs, and the appreciation and interaction with every corner of the world that is explored. Lastly, there is the tutorial of movement and basic mechanics that at the same time serves as introduction with Ciri, the last main character in the story, who also has a lot of sentimental importance for Geralt. This is a straightforward sequence and the combat portion is optional, demonstrating that combat is not the primary experience to encourage exploration in the game's vision. Still inside the dream, this then leads to the introduction of the antagonistic force and main conflict of the title, the Wild Hunt, which is an army of demonic elves from another dimension, whose main objective is to capture Ciri for her powers. In this opening, there are few samples of the world that it is invited to travel and explore, but each open world game has its own charm and seeks to generate a unique experience in the player. The essence of The Witcher and what gives life to that world is not incredible landscapes, memorable combats or unique creatures, which also exist, but it is the development of the narrative and the life of that story within the vast and rich open world. What leads the player to travel the continent from end to end and motivates them to carry out all the missions that are in their path is to interact with the characters, learn a little more about the story of the kingdom, the people who inhabit it, and the situation in which they find themselves. It's also about experiencing Geralt's development as a character and having the opportunity to share stories, decisions, and consequences with him. All these elements are those that are clearly and explicitly shown in the opening and those that will make the player want to ride Roach and reach the next town in search of Jennifer, knowing that they will end up interacting with countless strangers, accepting missions for rewards, and playing matches of Gwent. And for you, what other openings or opening sequences in open world games have been etched in your memory? Leave it in the comments below. I hope you have enjoyed this episode of Checkpoint. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share this to keep discovering the art in making and designing video games. See you next time!